مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. في عام 2008 أذهل انتخاب رجل أسود رئيسا للولايات المتحدة أمريكا والعالم. منذ ذلك الحين لم تختفي التوترات الأمريكية في بلادنا، ولكن اختلف حوارنا الوطني حول العراق اختلافا جذريا. ماذا عن الأشخاص الذين يشاركون في ذلك الحوار بشكل يومي أي الصحفيون؟ كيف أثرت رئاسة باراك أوباما على الصحفيين الأمريكيين السود؟ هل ينقلون أخبار البيت الأبيض مع وجود رئيس أسود بطريقة مختلفة عن وجود رئيس أبيض؟ هل ينقلون أخبار البيت الأبيض مع وجود رئيس أسود بطريقة مختلفة عن وجود رئيس أبيض؟ هل ينظرون إلى القرارات الرئاسية عبر عدسة مختلفة؟ وما تأثير عدم وجود مرشح أسود في السباق نحو البيت الأبيض عام 2016؟ لمناقشة هذه الأسئلة المشوقة يسرني أن أرحب في برنامج داخل واشنطن بواحدة من أكثر الصحفيين السود في أمريكا نفوذا، وهي مراسلة البيت الأبيض أبريل راين. Welcome back to Dakhel, Washington. I'm sitting here with White House correspondent April Ryan. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Ron.
So let me ask you, black journalist or journalist who is black? What is the difference? Is there one?
It sounds like President Obama. You know, when he was running for president, he's a man who's running for president who happens to be black. I am essentially a person who's a journalist, but I am a black person in America, and I'm a journalist who happens to be black, so I would check all of the above.
Okay. What are the most important issues on the agenda of, say, the African American community in America today?
Well, if we look at today, right now, economics, but also that's been very prevalent in the forefront, and we're watching on television, issues of criminal justice. We're seeing many of our young African American men in this country on videotape being physically manhandled or killed even by some police officers. We're watching bad policing that happens to end in a result where some black men are killed. And this is something that has been prevalent in the community that we have talked about for many, many years. And when this kind of thing happens, we don't always have videotape. But now we have the cell phones, and now we've heard President Obama talk about, accountability in the process of policing, bridging the gap of trust between the black community and the police departments, law enforcement around this country. And we're watching videos, watching how people are being taken down and killed, watching when people are confronted by the police or they're confronting police. So we have that accountability piece that can help determine what happened. And that's one of the main issues right now for Black America.
Do you think that mainstream networks and major urban daily newspapers are covering these issues well? What are the advantages that they have, and what are the problems that they have in covering these sorts of issues?
Well, Ron, the sad piece is that when we see community policing efforts, or when we see a sad effort with a black person or any person killed at the hands of police, it's at that crescendo moment. But before the crescendo moments, there are pieces that go along to the tail. In Black America and in Black media, we cover these pieces quite a bit. And for mainstream news, it's when we see the Ferguson crescendo moments, when you see Michael Brown laying in the street for 4 hours, and then you see the crowds upset and the confrontation with the police and the community, that's when mainstream America sees it. And that's when the world sees it, because we even knew that the world saw Ferguson because the UN even stepped in on that. The United Nations talked about the rights of the demonstrators. And the unfortunate thing is black media has been here for those moments, even before it gets to that crescendo piece, because we a lot of times do the news talking about little issues that could result in kinds of tensions that we've seen around the country. So mainstream media needs to really put more of a focus in on all America, not just mainstream America, meaning white people, but Hispanic, black, Asian, all sorts of people who call America home.
Now, no community in America, whether ethnic community, racial community, is unified on everything.
Exactly.
So what would you say are the most serious issues that are divisive within the African American community itself?
Ron, you're hitting on some really good points. In my book, The Presidency in Black and White, my close view of three presidents and race in America, I talked about this very subject with then President Bill Clinton. And we had a soul food dinner with him where garlic fried chicken, collard greens, something that we do on Sundays, cornbread, black families get together or friends, in the black community, the coming together, and it's with many communities, the coming together in good times really involve food. And we brought President Bill Clinton to a dinner, and he ate, and he said something very poignant. We asked him about an apology for slavery, because he started talking about race and healing the racial divide in this country. And he said, one of the reasons why he did not apologize for slavery is because the black community does not come together on issues. That's poignant for an American president to say that. So saying that, we have a lot of issues out there. We have the economic issue, we have the education issue, we have criminal justice issues, we have housing issues. We've got the gambit. The African American community has some of the highest numbers, the most disproportionate numbers there are in this country. We lead in we're the leaders in the worst numbers of every group on almost everything. And the sad piece is we cannot find a consensus to come together on many of these issues. So you've got a lot of different leaders who have a lot of different ideas to bring the community, move them forward, but when it comes time to bring it together, sometimes it just doesn't materialize. And the great thing, though, if I'm going back to the 50s and 60s, we had the blueprint. We had the blueprint. The African American community had the blueprint. The civil rights movement was the most successful movement in this country. And every other community or group has used that blueprint. And unfortunately, we've walked away from our own blueprint. And in the 50s and 60s, we used that blueprint for the Civil Rights Act. And we also used it for the Voting Rights Act. But since then, it's now about bridging the gaps of racial discrimination. But the problem is we've got to find a way to do it and come together on it. So there has not been a mass coming together in a mighty long time.
I'd love to pursue this, but I want to ask you about your experience in the White House.
Okay.
You have been a White House correspondent for a long time.
18 years.
For a long time. So first, how did that happen? And secondly, what are the unique challenges of being a reporter in that intense, boiling environment?
First of all, that room is unforgiving. It's very unforgiving. You have to know your stuff. You have to overstudy. And if you don't know, of course, everything happens all the time. It could be things that are planned, something could pop off and you just don't know, meaning something could just happen right away and you have to study up on it before you ask the president or before you ask the press secretary. So that's, you're always studying for a master's or a doctorate degree and never obtaining it. That's what you're constantly researching. Again, the room is unforgiving. When you have the leader of the free world in front of you, when you have the spokesperson for the leader of the free world or their principals, you have to make sure you know what's going on. You try to advance the story. So that means you're constantly trying to move the ball forward. Now, 18 years ago, I was told by my now company, AURN, well, about 19 years ago, they were thinking about bringing me over for a position as the Washington bureau chief. I said, oh, that would be great. I was young and dumb. I didn't know any better because if I would have known the intensity and all that the job encompassed, I may not have done it. You know, when you're older, you kind of think about things. When you're young, you just jump right in. Oh, I can do this, and if I can't do it, I'll just fail. So, and you know, no skin off my back. But knowing what I know now, I'm like, are you crazy? You know. So I was not part of the Washington mix. I was not part of the Washington politic or the Washington journalism corps. I came from Baltimore, personality radio, and I've been here ever since. I don't know how I made it, but I've been here ever since.
So let me ask you about some of the presidents that you've covered.
Yes.
So Bill Clinton. There was a time when Bill Clinton was referred to as our first black president. How did he view race?
Bill Clinton, the quote-unquote first black president, and I believe he was called that, deemed that because he had a heart for black America. Bill Clinton, he talked about race. The second term, that's when I started covering the White House, the second term. Bill Clinton understood that this nation is a nation that's browning. It's not something that we thought was going to happen. It's actually a fact. And what Bill Clinton did, he began a conversation on race, and he looked at it as a heart issue, and he looked at it as a legislative issue. But it was more of a heart issue because the legislation never came. But what he wanted to do was bridge the racial divide in this country, because we're now seeing, in this day and time, that we have more babies now being born in this country that are minority, and that's going to be the majority of the population in years to come. So he understood this, and he wanted us to come together because we still have a lot of haunts from the past, and we still haven't gotten over a lot of these hurts. So calling him the first black president, that might have been a stretch to some extent, but I believe he had the heart. We do now have the first black skinned youth president, but it was a stretch, but he accepted it. And not only that, Ron, John Kerry, the Secretary of State who ran for president, I did an interview with him in Baltimore, and he said, you know, I wouldn't mind, when he was running for president, I wouldn't mind being considered the second black president. So, so you know, people want to endear the black community when they're president or running, and that is their base, particularly for the Democrats. And you know, Bill Clinton, he did endear himself. His wife may be another situation.
I'm going to ask you about that.
Yeah, she's not him.
She's
not him. Yeah. But they're two totally different people. But yeah, he endeared himself in a lot of ways. He made people really respond to him.
Okay, when we come back, we're going to talk about Hillary Clinton and the other presidents with whom April Ryan worked in just a minute. My guest is April Ryan. April has been the White House correspondent for American Urban Radio Networks since 1997. In that time, she has covered 3 presidents up close and personal. Along with daily responsibilities at the White House, she hosts the daily feature, The White House Report, which is broadcast to nearly 500 affiliated radio stations nationwide. She has interviewed not only every president and first lady of the last 20 years, but national and world leaders too. Throughout, she has helped to keep issues of race on the national and global agenda. She recounts her personal experience in the White House in her new book called The Presidency in Black and White, My Up-Close View of 3 Presidents and Race in America. In an impressive recognition by her peers, April was elected in 2011 to serve on the board of the prestigious White House Correspondents Association. She is one of only 3 African Americans to serve on the board of the association's 97-year history. A native of Baltimore, Maryland, she is, like her mother, a graduate of that city's Morgan State University. She is also a proud mother of 2 daughters. So before we move away from the Clintons, let me ask you about the other Clinton, Hillary Clinton. Does she inherit her husband's popularity among Black America?
Rob, no, not at all. She has to earn it, and she's totally different from her husband. She was first lady. She was First Lady when President Clinton was there, when he was called the first black president. But you didn't hear her being called the first black First Lady, but you heard him called the first black president. Hillary Clinton is very interesting in her approach. She understands the black community. She's very much in the black community, but she's not Bill Clinton. And many of her advisors say the same thing. They say that, you know, she's not her husband, but she has an A+ for the heart issues. She's got an A+ there. She's not a political person, but she's a policy person. So you see a big difference there. But when it comes to the African American community, she's going to get a lot of people who are going to come in, and just because of the association with Bill Clinton, they're going to say, okay, let me give her a chance. But she's going to have to work for it because she is a different person. And she does not have that relationship with the black community that he did. But she does have a relationship, but it's not as deep and as rooted as Bill Clinton did. But I will say this for Hillary Clinton, she has shown that she is a trailblazer. There's no one with that pedigree that she has. First Secretary of State, who was a senator. Come on, I mean, she was First Lady. She was the first Secretary of State who was a First Lady, a senator. I mean, my gosh, you know, and then she was the First Lady of Arkansas. She's a lawyer. She's got a pedigree. No one else out there in this political field right now for this time has that kind of pedigree. So we'll see what she does, and I'm really looking forward to reporting on what she does.
George W. Bush, he appointed black Americans to the highest positions ever in American history, but yet doesn't have a legacy of good rapport with black America.
And
what happened?
What happened? We can talk a lot about that, Rob. That's a long list of what happened. First of all, I'm going to take you back to something. When George W. Bush came into the White House, we had an off the record with the president. And it was the reporters. Off the record means when the reporters get together with the president or the principal and we talk to them, and you're not allowed to report on it. But it's been so long, Rob, I can tell you now. So what happened was we were in the room, we were in the Roosevelt room of the White House in the West Wing. And I think I was one of a few minority reporters in that radio group. And I said, you know, he was talking so like we're talking now, and he was really gregarious. He was very comfortable in his setting. You know, he was comfortable in his skin. I said, you know, Mr. President, if you would have talked like this to black America, you might have gotten more votes. And he said, you know, at that time he got 9% of the black vote. And he said, you know, I know why black people didn't vote for me. I said, why? Number one, because I was a governor of the state of Texas. Number two, because of my father. Number three, because of my party. He said, number four, because, you know, my state had the most death row cases that any other state has had. And he just went on. And so I found that interesting. So understanding this, George W. Bush was not the person that he was perceived to be, in my opinion. Understanding what I saw on TV did not, I guess, marry into who he was. And I say this, even though at the beginning of the administration, he came out with this amicus brief against the University of Michigan and their admissions process talking about preferences. He didn't like that. But he had someone on his side, Condi Rice, who was then National Security Advisor, saying that she felt that there were times for targets of opportunity or affirmative action, if you will. That was one thing that, you know, many people would say, oh, he's not into affirmative action, he's not into race, or he's not into equality. That's one thing. But then when you talk to this man and when you watch him on a personal basis, Katrina was a bad mark. Katrina, you know, you had Hurricane Katrina, where thousands of people died, and you had Kanye West get up on that international telethon saying George Bush doesn't like black people. Well, it didn't marry up what the George Bush that I knew and this guy that was out there, you know, governing the country. I said they didn't match. So when it came to Katrina, George Bush got stuck in the issue of states' rights and the Republican doctrine of states' rights. The state had to deal with it, and they had to ask, and then ask for help from the federal government. So what happened was you had the mayor of New Orleans and the governor fighting back and forth as people were sitting on the rooftops. People were gasping for air, you know, in the ceiling of their roof, trying to get help or looking to find air to breathe. It was horrific. But at the same time, I was with this man while he was trying to figure it out. And that was one of the biggest marks of his life. But then you turn to a time when you have a president who is putting so much into Africa. He's trying to save lives in HIV/AIDS. And even Bill Clinton, former president, who they are now friends, Bill Clinton even said, he said, look, he said, I don't think George Bush was a racist. He said, I think that his policies did not help lift people out of poverty. He said, I don't think he's a racist. And then you have an issue where you have this man who's trying to save lives in Africa, global HIV efforts. And then, the White House, Republican White House, did not want to tout these efforts that he's doing in the black community or in the African American community because they looked at the black community as a loss.
April, we could go on for quite a while. There's lots to talk about, but thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
joining us in Dakhel, Washington.
Thank you, Rob.
بهذا نصل إلى نهاية هذه الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كانت لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول الجوانب السياسية لمساءلة الأعراق في أمريكا، أرجو أن تراسلوني مباشرة على عنوان البريد الإلكتروني التالي insidewashington@alhurra.com. معكم روبرت ساتلوف. شكرا لكم وإلى اللقاء.